Hi, welcome to Cherie's spiritual weight loss journey. Oh, it was hot in the house. It's 90 degrees out here. It is 90 degrees out here at 10 o'clock at night. I'm telling you, woo, the heat is on. The heat is definitely on. I was gonna walk around the neighborhood and give my dog a walk, and I figured, nah, that's just gonna make me even hotter. Make me burn up some calories that I ate today. Today, I ate, I had 2 protein shakes, and then, what I ate was some beans and rice, some baby carrots, and some fried chicken wings. It was good. It was really good. And my dog, loved the bones. I had got some good news for myself. Yes, got some good news. The stork is gonna bring us a baby. Yes, gonna bring us a baby. Well, yeah, it's gonna be both our babies, me and Snoopy. A baby pit bull is on the way. And I'm so happy because I've been sitting up here thinking, I think I need another dog. I think I need another dog. I had no idea that it was going to be gifted to me. And I was like, wow. Right? Heaven must be like this. It must be like this. So, one of the things that I also did today is I decided to apply for a job. And I know I don't really want to work, but I'm thinking I might need to work a few more years. Okay, I am. I'm thinking I need to work a few more years, because your girl's just not in the right position, to live off of welfare. I'm not. So I'm thinking if I can find a position, I don't want to be in constant contact with people. I don't want to be on, a quota of how many pigs. I'm getting a little too old for that. It was good for a while to strengthen me back up. But then, another year or so, it started breaking me down. Actually, it was more than a year. I worked at Amazon for 4 years. And that third year, it started breaking me down. And it wasn't because I couldn't do the work. It was having to do heavy work, repetitive work for long periods of time. And like I said, I did go part-time, but I didn't I didn't spread out, the hours throughout the day. I did them consolidated on the weekends. So I did 10 hours on Sunday and Saturday. And I liked it, and it was going well. And then that was up until, the bullshit games started to happen. And the men's there decided they didn't want me there, and they was going to do whatever was necessary to get me out, including sabotage, including purposely sabotaging my work so that I would get a write-up and so forth and so on, right? But, I was going to just continue until I got sick. Once I got sick, that's when I decided, nah, they don't want me there if they're not going to accept my doctor's note that I got the flu. Period. So that's how that ended. So then I was like, okay, can I accept that and just be retired? On one hand, I thought I could, and then on the other hand, I'm like, I don't know, maybe I should give it another try, because I just don't want to opt out, right? Because if I opt out too soon, then I'll be struggling in a way, but I don't necessarily have to struggle, because I can always do like the reverse mortgage thing, or I can always do the bankruptcy thing, and neither one of those sound appealing to me. So I'm gonna give it another try to see if I can get me a job where I don't have to deal with a lot of jackasses. Okay? And especially, since winter's coming, winter's getting ready to, in my opinion, be very cold. Every time we get a very hot winter, then we'll always get a very hot summer, then we'll always get a very cold winter. Understanding that, do not think that that's not a precaution. The precaution is, it's not going to be an easy winter. It is not going to be an easy winter. It's going to be a cold winter. And that's going to be really hard on people who are homeless. It's even going to be hard for people who are living in their vans, in their vehicles, because you need proper ventilation. You have to get rid of that moisture to avoid, mold. And to boot, even the rain and the snow, there's something in the water. I'm telling you, there's something in the water. And when there's something in the water, it's not clean water. it is not clean water. And when it's not clean water, then there's no telling how sick you can get. That would depend strictly on your immunity system, your autoimmune system. So, but I have been, questioning myself over and over and over and over again. Trying to figure out beyond the gaslighting where men are blaming women to be at fault, right? First of all, women in the home, they don't get support, right? Most of the time when women, these women out here that are, getting these trades, these certificates and these degrees, they had to find, employers that, they would use, to help them with their education. A lot of them have, student loans, no doubt. And a lot of them aren't living, on campus and doing the dorm thing, And even my oldest daughter, she looked at me like I failed her, because I couldn't, send her to the women's university and, pay for her dorm room and all of that. And I tried to tell her that, mom don't have that kind of money. My main concern was to raise you away from the ghetto. That was my main concern. Damn these people behind me. So, I feel like because I did that, as a single parent, and my second husband, he was co-parenting in a way, sometimes willingly, sometimes unwillingly. But yeah. And I took, primary custody of her till she got to be about 16. She got real defiant, and I thought it was best that she went and lived with her father because we were actually, not getting along at that point. But like I said, I could be blamed. I could be blamed for not being a good mother when, I pretty much had to develop myself. I had a really rough childhood. I did. But I took it like a soldier. Okay? And, and my main priority, was not to burden my mother. That was my main priority, was not to burden my mother. And the only way I could not burden my mother was to grow up fast. I said, I've been working since 1975. It's proof on my Social Security resume. I don't have to talk, a bunch of, made up jobs. I have receipts, and the jobs that I did, they were legitimate. And, I have tried to get jobs that, should have helped me, further my education. I hated high school. There was just too much drama going on in the classroom, and then, I loved college, right? And I was tempted to stay in college and have like 10 degrees if they would have let me, but they were like, no, we're not gonna let you hang out in the school, in our colleges and universities forever. Like, what? Why not? But they were like, nope, you gotta get matriculated. And what the whole matriculated means is that, your classes and your timeline has to be according to their standards. Okay? But, I thought, when I was growing up, that, I could, go into all of the fields just to see if that was the right fit, and I felt like I was unique, in trying to, find my unique field, because everybody else, was given advice as to their career choice, but they told me I could be whatever I want to be. Whatever I set my mind to be, I could do it. I was like, okay, and therefore, when a person gets told that, that you're well-rounded enough to be able to do whatever you set your mind to do, finding out what it is that you really want to do is complicated. Now, in our society, we have a lot of educated women who got married to men that was making enough money to where she didn't have to work, or where she became, a stay-at-home mom. Educated women, right? And I'm like, okay, even when I look at, the First Lady, Michelle Obama, I'm like, this is a lawyer, right? However, this is a lawyer that was, highly educated. Of course, you have to be highly educated to be a lawyer. Highly intelligent to pass that bar. Excellent memory. And yet, she wasn't able to even utilize her abilities at all, right? Not enough to to make a name for herself, right? I had looked at her shorts yesterday, and her short was, she had always, was the supporting actress for everybody. And she now wants to make herself a priority. And that was one of the things that I had to face. Honestly, when the kids left, when, there was no job, because I could always lose myself in a job. But it was like, I really didn't know what to do with myself. Thankfully, I had my dog, right? My dog kept me grounded. My dog was my anchor. Even now, when I ask her, I say, hey, you want to go for a walk? She's like, yeah, let's go, right? But if she wasn't there, I probably would have said, no, it's not safe. Let me not. I would take the safe route. Now, getting out doesn't necessarily mean that it's not safe. It's just, it increases your risk of accidents or a mishap. So, that's how that went. Then, when you come home, the unconditional love when they greet you at the door, nobody can deny that. Nobody in their right mind, when you have a dog greeting you at the door with unconditional love, tail just a wagging, big old grin on their mouth, maybe even jumping up and down, you cannot deny that. Being so ingratiating. Now, getting back to what I was talking about. So here, the first lady was educated, and this has happened to a lot of women. They got educated, they have degrees tucked underneath their belt, they take time out, have kids. They may never utilize the degree that they worked so hard to achieve. They may never utilize that degree. Right? And that's not really the biggest problem, right? But there are other women who don't have a spouse or a provider that would take care of them. And they could have used a degree. So whatever grants, whatever scholarships that these people had achieved, it's kind of like a wash. Yes, they were highly intelligent women that raised children, and that's a beautiful thing, to have a highly intelligent mother that will raise you, who will raise you to be, probably a great contributor to society. Probably. Just because the education itself, they know how to teach. Right? And in my opinion, you didn't really learn a thing unless you can teach a thing. That's how I believe it. Right? That's why one one of the things I had to ask AI. One of the things I had to ask AI was, AI, how come people aren't paraphrasing anymore? And there was quite a list of why. And that surprised me, that there was a list, and most of it, had to do with impatience, focusing on, what they were going to say next, afraid that, they misinterpreted or couldn't understand what the person was saying. And I was like, well, that's the whole reason for the paraphrase. The whole reason that you paraphrase is to make sure that in your own words, you got an understanding of what was said. Okay? So that was something that, people, definitely are neglecting to do. And that is to, first of all, have the correct interpretation or inquiring if they had understood what was said, so that they could respond appropriately. And I was like, well, to me, that makes all the sense in the world why we have so much misunderstandings. And the mere fact that they're afraid that they, probably got the message right, it confirms that, right? It confirms that, they probably didn't get the message right, or they only got the message partially right. So, my lips are dry. So, then I had to ask myself, well, shouldn't that be the priority? Is to understand the question before you just, react? If you have the understanding of what was being said, that gives you what you need to know to respond, right? That's another reason why I don't think that it's appropriate for people not to be transparent. Give people all of the information that they need to know in order to make a decision based off of the information that was given to them. If you're just giving somebody a directive or a statement, that, what? And then you don't want to be held responsible that this person did an action based off of your directive. Now, let's talk about the directives that happen, in the family, right? In the family, women are directed not to be educated. Women are directed not to go to work. Women are directed to shrink themselves, right? shrink themselves, submit, be subordinate to your man, right? And then you're going to blame them for the conditions of our society. I don't understand, how that makes sense to people who think like that. Now, the women who have been educated, most of the time, they end up in at least 20 or 30-year relationships. So by then, the kids, are well off. They're better off than, say, the children, that don't have, an educated parent in the house. Okay, I think I could be down here. I'm just down here checking out the area of one of the places that I had put in an application to, and I like it. I like it a lot because I will have several avenues to get to this location. Yeah, so I'm with this position. If they got the right pay, it did not state how much the pay was. I hate positions like that, where you don't know how much they're going to pay, and then be totally disappointed. And you can't go on what happened in the past because, hey, the pandemic changed everything. Pandemic changed everything. Pandemic changed the pay scale. Pandemic changed, job description, everything. Right? So, that was one of the things that I had on my mind. And then, of course, the offender, came out again strong, right? Telling these men that, hey, how do you say that women are the problem and that they probably hate you, but they were the only ones that stayed and raised you day in, day out, night and day? Okay? And then you want to idealize a situation that if you had a father in the house, that, your circumstances would be better, right? But the mere fact that he wasn't there, if your father had been in the house, it was probably because your household was better without him. Now, that's the way that he was at that time. Now, he may change after he's 50 years old, right? Where, a lot of these men are like, yeah, I'm 50 years old. I want to settle down now with a 20-year-old. I'm 60 years old. I want to settle down with a 30-year-old. Okay? This is what we've been seeing. And yet, we're trying to even warn them, like, look, man, you don't want to do that. you're thinking that this woman is going to, be loyal to you, but y'all don't have nothing in common. Nothing in common. Except what? That you can provide some kind of stability for her. And chances are, even the stability that you're providing for her is minimal. It's minimal. Let's just put it like that. It's minimal sustenance. So those were a few things that I had on my mind, the temperatures actually dropped to 88 degrees. Yay! So, I don't know. I guess I'm kind of manifesting this job because, I am kind of tired. I'm not ready to opt out. I tried to get myself back together. I'm going to keep trying to get myself back together. I just don't want to be in an environment that's toxic, prejudiced, racist, and discriminatory. I just can't believe that, at my grown-up age, and the product of interracial breeding, that they're going to this and that. Oh, that's a nice statue. So another thing that I had looked up and I was trying to figure out, because in astrology, in ancient astrology, all of the symbols, the animals, were representative of non-human characteristics, right? And that the people represented in astrology were had angelic humanoid combinations. Now you can say that maybe they're angels, fallen angels. You can say that because if an angel goes dark, they probably are a fallen angel, okay? But there's three signs in the zodiac that are represented by people, right? That's Gemini, which is two people, Virgo, the Virgin, right? And Aquarius, the water bearer, right? And a lot of people will say, oh, well, we're going to consider, Aquarius a water sign because, they carry the water. And I'm like, if they're carrying the water, they're not in the water, right? And, some artists will actually depict them as being in the water and pouring the water over them, while others will show them as having one foot in the water and pouring the water and pouring whatever's in the container into the water. Okay? But I'm gonna have to look at their constellation. Because I'm thinking that they are represented in the constellation as the Big Dipper. But anyway, what I was trying to say is Aquarius, which is the number 11, right? 1 and 1, right? So they have an odd number in the first place, and then they have an odd number in the second place, right? And therefore they do have a position in the realm of masculinity and femininity, right? And Pisces also has a 1 and a 2. But and you can say that Capricorn is also a double digit. However, they have a 0, and 0 is really a placeholder. But even a placeholder has a presence, right? But getting back to what I was saying is that the Aquarius is the water pourer. They're pouring the water. Let me ask. Hold on. Okay. I was wrong about that Big Dipper thing. But they do hold. It's a humanoid holding a container of water. Right? When you contain water, then that's being in control of your feelings, because you've got your feelings in a container, right? Okay. And I'm gonna tell you, every Aquarius that I know, they can spot, other people's emotions, quick and easy. Now, just depending on other placements in their chart, on how they handle that information. Also, I was looking at the graphs that was given to me, where they had, showed me my percentages, because I'm an INTJ, right? And I thought it was pretty amazing to see the graph. I hadn't looked at the graph in a long time, but I'm glad, I went back and looked at that yesterday. I might post it, but I think that's a very good, test to take, and they'll graph, your percentages. rise, I found out I could go on one charge back to work and return home on one charge. Great. And it also avoids the mixed master. I think it would be a great position for me. Shout out to let me see what her name is. Shout out to Chanel for easing my mind, because of course I was thinking, what would I wear to the interview and all of that, and she kind of put my mind at ease that in this day and age, they're doing interviews online, and I'm like, oh, that's cool. That's something that I should start, preparing for, is to do online interviews, because this is the time that we live in, and that that would save me a trip. I won't have to worry about what I'm gonna wear. Basically, you could just wear a shirt, right? You could basically just wear a white shirt, have your hair, done, your face done, and and concentrate more on as to why you want the job. Okay. In regards to the conversation that hit home with the first lady, when we get older, and the kids have flown the nest, a lot of times it's there's a grieving process where we start feeling a loss, and that's something that nobody really talks about, even though we kind of know that it exists. And if you don't have an identity, or if you had spent the majority of your time 20 years of your time looking after your children and making them a priority, when they're gone, you have some adjustments to do. And a lot of times, we have not been coached on techniques on how to overcome empty nest syndrome. Okay? And a lot of people feel the empty nest syndrome, and they handle it their own way, because an empty nest syndrome is a change. It's stressful, and for some, they may feel like it's a loss, and people, deal with loss in different ways. I would like, in my, imaginary world, that, the First Lady would, start utilizing, her education and her talent, because she's very influential, believe it or not. She's got all the women who talk about doing their steps motivated, right? Even myself, every day I look and see how many steps I did today. I would like to do those 10,000 steps, but, even when I don't do the 10,000 steps, I at least want to know how many steps I did do today. And shout out to, Michelle Obama. Yeah. And not to mention, Michelle Obama, for a senior citizen, she looks very good. Yes, she does.